Before we get too far underway today, I want to recognize that my mom is here today. If you want to just stand, they might be able to see you. And no, she doesn't tell stories. When I was growing up, Dad really had two main jobs other than the ones that he was working on the side. One was at Rath Packing Company, and then most of his life he spent at John Deere's. And so like many of you guys who are hard workers and you don't really say much about what you do, you just do it. And Dad was that way about Deere's, except once. So he had been called in at Deere's, and they were going to put in a new machine that was probably as long as the church is here. And it was coming from Germany, and they wanted him there when it was installed so that he could see how it all worked and everything. Dad was actually an HVAC guy, but he was pretty mechanical. And they told him that they wanted him to train two young guys that they were hiring who had engineering degrees, but he wanted them there. They, of course, were going to be at a labor grade 3 higher than Dad. That's a different homily. We won't get into that today. So Dad was there. They got this thing installed, and when the young guys came, he came and showed them the ropes and what was going on. So at some point in time later, he was through that part of the plant, and he stopped to see how things were going. They said, "Oh, it's fine, it's fine." And then he happened to hear that they were talking about running the machine in reverse. And Dad went back to them, and they said, "You can't do that." And one of the guys said, "Who are you?" And Dad said, "It doesn't make any difference who I am. You can't do that if you do it, it'll wreck it." Well, they did, and it did. Thousands of dollars worth of damage, okay? And I thought about that. Part of that's because it's Labor Day weekend. But I also thought about it in terms of the fact that they thought that just because they had this degree that they really knew everything and that Dad really wasn't worth too much. And I think that it's that kind of judgments that we're making about people, that lack of humility, that maybe an overproduction of arrogance, that really is at the root of a lot of the things that we're experiencing in our world today. So the first reading of the gospel today really the first reading started out, "My son, conduct your affairs with humility." And humility comes from the word humus, which means the earth. And when we start slicing and dicing and drawing ourselves up and over above other people, then we're not really following what Christ's example was. About a month ago, I preached about the fact that in church, when it comes to God, that God really, the Scriptures tell us, God knows no favorites. And so I think I used the example of being kind of dismayed when churches have politicians come in and talk, which of course Catholics don't do that. But they make a big fuss over a politician who comes to church. Well, in here, there isn't anybody better than anybody else because that's what it is in God's eyes. Okay, nobody is better than anybody else. And so Jesus gave that example today about the banquet. Okay, and so he says that you have this big wedding banquet. It'd be like somebody coming into your wedding reception and sitting where the bride and groom are supposed to be sitting. Okay? And so he talks about that idea because we've talked about for months now about what we're called to as Christians is to be in relationship with each other. And humility has a particular kind of relationship with each other. So we don't see ourselves as better than others. And I think that sometimes we do this consciously, but sometimes it happens subconsciously. And so because of a person's color or race or political affiliation or religious background, orientation, whatever it is, we have ways that all of a sudden we're starting to set ourselves up and above over others and making judgments about others. And if we follow Christ, who really doesn't have any of that, then we need to wrestle with what does that mean in my own life. Okay? And so that's a difficult thing for us to do. And yet, if we're followers of Christ, somehow we have to wrestle with what does that mean when we're all the same in God's eyes. And so I think that you pick the issue in society right now, but most of the time it has to do with this idea about us making judgments about others. And so we come to church and, we sang 5 verses of Gather the People, that everybody is called to the table. But we're getting to the point we've talked about in our civil discourse, we can't even have conversations with each other if we don't agree. We tend to demonize each other and call each other names and what we used to call in speech ad hominem arguments. We would start attacking the person instead of what the point that they were trying to make. We need to be able to have those conversations. But I think underneath all of that, one of the things that we take a look at is all you need to do is look at Christ's life and remind myself that when he came, he didn't hang around with us. We're the middle class. We have it made. Jesus spent most of his time with the poor, the marginal, the outcast. His radar was always up for what I like to say, who's not here? And he was always going after them. Those are the people nowadays that we are castigating and calling outcasts, okay? But that's where he spent his time. And so somehow each of us personally need to figure out in our own life, if I'm going to be a follower of Jesus, how am I going to do that in my life? In what ways am I going to gather and not divide? In what ways am I going to be inviting people and bringing them together? I am thoroughly convinced, the older I get and the more I think and pray about this, that on the final day, Jesus isn't going to get after us because we missed the 9 First Fridays. He's going to say, what about this person? And what about these people who live next to you? And what about this guy at work? And what about this lady? I think that's what he's going to do. What did you do for the least of these? And there's going to be no place to go that day. There isn't going to be if they hadn't done this right. No, he's going to look right at us and say, what'd you do about this? And so it's this idea about how we are in relationship to each other. And sometimes with organized religion, that's a problem because people don't feel comfortable in churches because they think they have to be all scrubbed up to go there. Well, I got news for you. If this is a place for scrubbed up people, get a new pastor. Okay? We're here because we need it. We're here because none of us are better than anybody else. And so as we listen to these readings and continue to pray through this mess, this is what J.D. is going to be baptized into today. This is not some kind of an elite kind of thing, but J.D. is going to be baptized into this community of faith that says we are all in this together. None of us are better than anybody else. And not only is that true, but we have a responsibility to look at those who are on the outside, who are on the margin, who are not accepted, and say, what am I doing about them? I want to end with an illustration that after I heard about it, many of you remember Archbishop Hannes, 2 archbishops ago. He was a big guy. He was a big Nebraska farm boy. And he was in Waterloo one time at what is now my home parish and getting ready for some big archdiocesan event. And he got there early, so he decided to go for a walk. So he just had black pants and a T-shirt on. He was just out walking around the block. And so there was a woman there, I think her name was Maria, but she was the one who did the catering, the Spanish woman who did all the catering. So she had a big van parked next to the church, and she saw the archbishop. She didn't recognize him. She says, "You with the big arms, get over here and help me." The archbishop told this story. So he's in there hauling in the hors d'oeuvres and these big carts with the drinks and stuff on it. And so he says, "Well, ma'am, is there anything else?" She said, "Well, is there anything else in the van?" So he went out and looked. He goes, "No, ma'am." She said, "Okay, thank you." And she went about her business, and he went back to the rectory and got all his bishop stuff on and got ready for church and came down the aisle, and she almost had a stroke because she had the archbishop working for her. They got to be good friends after that. But my point is this. Those are the kind of people we need to look at emulating, okay? We have people in our country who are making it all about them and how great they are and how perfect they are and all those kinds of things. That is so anti-biblical and anti-Christian that I can't stand it. So we need to look at people like Pope Francis, who moved out of the papal apartments into this very simple apartment. There was a picture on it online the other day. It looks kind of like a low-budget hotel room where he's living. He slips out at night from time to time, putting on just a black cassock and a simple hat, gets out of his white stuff. The palace guards go crazy because he gets out and he goes into the poor parts of Rome, okay? We need to look at people like me, our own Archbishop Jacobs, at archdiocesan events, or certainly events with priests too. When the meal's done, he's up clearing tables before anybody else is. Okay? No better than anybody else. That's the example we need to be following, not a self-righteous kind of a way that points like the world revolves around me, okay? Because that's not what Christ called us to. So as we get ready to do this baptism today and bring this little man into the church, we do so reminding ourselves that that's what our baptism is about. It's about us being in this together, to remind ourselves that in God's eyes, everybody is important, but nobody's important than anybody else. Those who exalt themselves will get humbled, but those who humble themselves will be exalted.